So good morning and welcome to Chepstow, or where I am now, Chepstow Castle. And I'm here because I want to do two things. Firstly, I want to answer for tourists, is Chepstow worth coming to? And the answer is absolutely yes. You've got Chepstow Castle, you've got Tintern Abbey, you've got the Chepstow Walls, Chepstow itself is beautiful, and you've got the Iron Bridge here. We're going to look at all of those so that you get a feel for this place should you want to visit. But for the historians, this is also fantastic because you've got 800 years of history here in Chepstow. We can demonstrate some key historical events. Over behind me, we have the River Wye here. You can probably see it over my shoulder. The green field behind is England. And if I flip the other way, then behind me here in Chepstow, we're looking at Wales. And that is why this castle's here. It's key location as an entry point along the River Wye into Wales. So let's have a look around, let's understand it, and let's enjoy. The first reason to come here as a tourist, apart from the fact that it's a castle, it's a fantastic castle and they let you explore. I mean, I'm quite impressed. I'm used to doing castles in Greece where they let you explore, but there's no restriction, there's no safety. Here, they let you explore. And normally health and safety is number one in the UK, but this, I love it. You know, we're allowed to go everywhere. You can see here, nice stairs down, we can keep going. We can come in here, you can spend a couple of hours very happily exploring this castle and the views. And it is a fantastic castle. It's one of the oldest castles in England. In fact, it's the oldest stone castle built in England after the Roman occupation. We should do is start at the beginning. We'll come in the main gate. We'll look at the cost of coming in. We'll look at what's available in terms of facilities, and we'll walk up through the castle so that you can get a feel for a little bit of its history. But boy, look at these views in this location. It is absolutely fantastic. And down here we get a fantastic look at this iron bridge. Now this iron bridge down here, I believe the central arch is something like 39 metres, the ones either side are 16 metres, and then the ones at the end are 10 metres. It was built in 1816, and it is a perfect example of the Industrial Revolution and the effect it had on the United Kingdom. The Industrial Revolution happening, of course, at the end of the 18th century and transforming the UK into the Victorian powerhouse that it became. And you set that against this castle here, and you have 800 years of history, notwithstanding, of course, Chepstow itself on the outer walls here, the history of Wales, the history of this town, and as it is now, a modern tourist destination for very obvious reasons. If you want to come and explore a castle in the UK, there are many castles. This is not a bad one to come to. The outside, as we approach Chepstow Castle, you can see it's pretty impressive. Here we have the main gate. Now this is interesting in that this, I believe, was the first double tower main gate built in the UK, and it was built in about 1270. The majority of this castle actually was finished by 1270, and it bears remarkable similarities, particularly in this aspect, to Windsor Castle, which was a contemporary castle actually. This tower here reminds me very much of the Curfew Tower in Windsor, which was built about 50 years before this one. This one was built in about 1270. The Curfew Tower, which is actually of a similar size, was built in about 1227 to 1230, and I think there's very definite design cues that have been taken here from Windsor, and probably also in Windsor from here, because inevitably the gentlemen who were building this on behalf of the king would have been going and seeing the king at Windsor. It's £8.70 to get in. There's a ticket office immediately inside the main gates here, and then to the right there is a little shop, quite a nice little shop actually, being in Wales. Inevitably there are Welsh dragons and so on, but you can see quite a nice little shop, and should you need toilets, they are in the car park. So the shop here is located in what used to be the main kitchens for the castle, and you can see the castle is largely ruined now, but it gives you a really good perspective of what this place would have been like. You can see where the post holes for the different floors would have been. There would have been a wall up here, and clearly it was a good place. Now, another essential need, of course, in any castle is wine and alcohol. And we come down here to what was the wine cellar of the castle, which amuses me greatly because it's down in the basement. Obviously, it would have been lovely and cool, but also quite protected. Just outside from the wine cellar, we get a fantastic view as to why they actually built the castle here. The main reason, of course, was its location. It's right on the border of England and Wales, and it's on the River Wye, and it's on a major entry point into Wales. And they wanted to defend this point. They wanted to project power. And I think this castle was more actually about power than it was siege and defence. It was never attacked during its prime period of sort of 1067 through to really the 13th, end of the 13th, early 14th century. And I don't think it was ever intended to be attacked. It's defensive, obviously. You can see on these cliffs here, highly defensive, but the walls on this side are very thin. They weren't expecting it to be attacked here. They're only about 90 centimetres to 1 metre thick. They're a bit thicker on the other side, up to about 3 metres, but even that in itself is not hugely thick. And we can also see why this castle was called Siegel Castle, because a sigil in Old English was a bend in the river, and it was only in the 14th century that it became Chepstow, because a market town had arisen around the castle. There was nothing here when they originally built the castle, and they called it Chepstow, meaning marketplace or market town, and that's where this name came from. In here we have something that's often neglected in castles, or at least in castle videos, and these are the toilets, and literally they just flow straight down into the River Wye here. You get quite a good view over England on the other side of the bank there, but these are castle toilets, and it just demonstrates they were common in all castles, obviously. These are particularly good because rather than having a man at the bottom having to shovel everything out, it just goes straight into the river and goes downstream for the people to enjoy. So up these steps from the wine cellar would have been what was at the time the Great Hall. You can see this Great Hall now has beer kegs and a toilet in it, and I don't think it would have been that different when it was built in 1270. It was where the High Lords feasted and drank and basically had a big party. And as I said, most of this castle was built around 1270. The original castle, which we'll go and look at in a minute, the original keep, was built in 1267, but the majority of the castle was built in about 1270 or thereabouts, and has been fairly complete ever since. And now, for those who are wondering what all this paraphernalia, marquee and so on is, there's a little concert here. They have concerts here. There's one, I think, tomorrow night. And obviously people come here, enjoy themselves, drink some beer and so on. So the purpose of the castle, really, other than being defensive, hasn't changed much in the 800 years or so that it's existed. So next to the Great Hall, they now keep the original castle doors. So these are from the main gate, and these date at the absolute latest from 1190 AD, and they represent the oldest castle doors in Europe. You can see there's a door within the door. They're now kept in here. They were actually hung until 1962 when they were replaced with the current castle doors, but they are fantastic. They also demonstrate, of course, that this place was never breached through at least the main entrance, because they're intact. Point of reference, you can see the main gate again down there, and there are actually 3 baileys. This is the first, bailey being a courtyard, and I think it probably demonstrates the construction of this place. You come up through a second bailey. So here we are in the first bailey after the main gate entrance, and actually we can see, although this tower itself is very dark inside, that this was originally an external tower and is now an internal tower. If we look, for example, here above the tower, we can see the old arrow slots being closed up, and as you saw in the left inside the tower as well, a window which has now been blocked up by the wall that they extended down here. But these walls, these new walls, I suppose, for the third bailey, or the first bailey, depending on your perspective as you come in the main gate, are still 800 years old. We're talking about the development of a castle over 200 years. So they had the keep and the first bailey, then they had the second bailey. We're just outside the second bailey, and then here we have the third bailey, which was clearly the last addition to the castle, but is still some 800 or so years old. And so here we are above the main gate, these 2 towers, and we get a fantastic view actually down into this tower here. And although there seems to be a roof at the bottom, and I think there's probably some room there now, it used to be dungeons down there. Fantastic. And a little view over Chepstow there. You can see a solid defensive gate.
mate. You hold this a minute and I'll get some pictures of the landscape.
I'm in two minds as well. I would call this a second line of defence, because in the end there's only one external curtain wall, and yes, you can break into the first bailey and then you find yourself in the second bailey, but if I was attacking this place I would probably personally be going for the main keep from the outside, because there's only one wall protecting us, as you can see, and we're into the second bailey. You can see the curtain wall running around. You can see the curtain wall on the Welsh side, which is more vulnerable, far, far, far more substantial than the curtain wall on the English side. But of course, we look over the curtain wall on the English side and you don't need as much protection, apart from the fact it's on the English side. You have the river and these cliffs. And it's beautiful, I have to say. If you come here, it's absolutely beautiful. So as we walk up into the second bailey, it's a good chance to talk about the keep here. This is the original part of the castle, and this is unusual and unique in many ways because it was built 1 year after the Norman Conquest. So William the Conqueror came across to Hastings and fought King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and beat Harold and became king and overlord of the UK. But he wanted, obviously, to exert his control across the entire kingdom as it was, including Wales, Scotland and so on. And so he very quickly built at this site a stone keep here. And this stone keep was unique because firstly it was stone. In those days they were building motte and bailey castles which were constructed of wood, wooden palisades with a wooden building in the middle. For example, that's how Windsor started 3 years later in 1070. But this was stone, and this was here with what would have been originally a wooden protective wall around it, which was then over the next couple of hundred years up to about 1270, 1280, replaced with these stone curtain walls. So here by the keep of Chepstow Castle we get a fantastic view of the River Wye and England the other side. We are in Wales, and down there we have the Iron Bridge, the largest arch span iron bridge in the world, built in 1816. We'll go and have a look at that in a few minutes. But this castle is here because this clearly is a main entry point into Wales, and the castle was here before anything else. They built this castle in 1067, a year after William the Conqueror came here and defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, taking over through Norman conquest the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom didn't fall immediately. He had to fight for it. So he very quickly built a castle here to control this entry point into Wales, and more, in my opinion, as a demonstration of power and intent rather than defence, although clearly this castle could be used for defence. I don't personally think it was ever really built for defence. Yes, there are defensive features. The gates, for example, this curtain wall facing Wales, but the curtain wall facing the UK is actually very thin. You can see from the top here, it's only about a metre wide, if that. Yes, you have the cliffs, yes, you have the river, but I don't think they ever expected this place to be besieged. This place was as much about a projection of power as it was anything else. And here, behind us, we get a good look at the keep, which was the original construction here. Only about 6 metres high originally, and then extended upwards since then. So here we are in the Great Tower, or the Castle Keep, and you can actually see, I think, the original height of the building when you look at the walls here. And then they added additional floors, obviously, during the 11th and 12th centuries. Originally, there were only 3 walls here, windows here. You can see them here, very small slits. And this would have been a very dark, depressing room, but it was built for defence because at that time, you know, William the Conqueror had just come into England. There was still a lot of angst and anger about his takeover of the UK, and this was a very defensive room. It was the only stone building in the castle at the time. The castle, as I said, would have had wooden palisades running around it, which would have prevented people from coming in here. But this room, with its thicker walls and with its small windows and one entrance, was made for defence, and then modified subsequently. And you can see fantastic Gothic architecture up here, modified subsequently in the following 200 years to become a much more impressive room, and less about defence and more about impression. I mean, you can see up there some of the original plasterwork, some of the original cornicing. Fantastic. Big space, but the only original thing here in this castle. from 1067 through to about 1111. I think they built this. So militarily, the heyday of this castle, as I said, was from 1067 through to about the end of the 1300s. But it then became effectively a domestic pleasure playhouse for the local lords, and certainly in Tudor times it was highly domesticated. The threat of attack from the Welsh by the end of the 1300s had diminished significantly, and this castle was a statement of power for the lords and ladies of the time. But it became relevant again during the English Civil War, because Monmouthshire, and we are in Monmouthshire here in Wales, was very royalist. I've never understood why, really. I'm sure someone can tell me, because the Welsh always hated the royal rule, but the Welsh were for King Charles in the Civil War. And Gloucestershire, which is literally just over the River Wye there, was very much parliamentarian, for the parliamentarians, the opposition. So this place was besieged, and it was besieged twice, I think round about 1647 and 1649 or something like that. But it fell very quickly because it was not built to withstand cannon fire, and therefore siege here was pretty pointless. The design by that time was outdated. And for example, if you look up on the hill here, these houses on the hill, I mean, this point is completely, this location for a castle nowadays is completely pointless, because you could take cannon up onto that hill, range them down on the castle and completely destroy it. So these sieges were very short-lived. Unfortunately, the commander here at the time was then killed for refusing to immediately surrender to the royalists and the parliamentarians. But anyway, so leaving the castle and the car park, we are going to go and have a little look around Chepstow town so you get a feel for it. But I would recommend, immediately outside the car park and the castle is this fantastic Georgian house, which is Chepstow Museum. Now, it's free entry, and I've read that it's very good inside. Unfortunately, and this is a bit of advice for you, it's closed on a Wednesday, and today happens to be a Wednesday, so I cannot go in there and tell you what it's like. But I would recommend that you go and have a look in there, because it's free. Why wouldn't you? So, we've seen the castle, and we've also seen the Iron Bridge, and we're now also located where the museum is. We're just going to have this little walk up into Chepstow. There are some walls I want to look at and show you, because Chepstow used to be a walled town or a walled city. And we'll go and find these walls, have a quick look at them, explain how old they are, what they were, why they're here, and see what else Chepstow has to offer. So just coming up the hill from the castle, we've come across these almshouses, which were effectively poorhouses or workhouses. This one was constructed in 1710, and for the maintenance of 6 poor men and 6 poor women, as it says on the wall here. But these were pretty terrible places, basically. These were for debtors, for people who were the dropouts of society. And the idea was that it was social reform, it would make them better people, but these were prisons, essentially, workhouses where you were forced into labour for virtually no money at all, board and lodging. So Chepstow is actually a very sweet town, and only a couple of minutes walk up from the castle you have this church down here, and this fantastic pedestrianised street with shops, restaurants, coffee shops, tea shops, etc. I mean, it is a touristy place, let's be honest about it, but this is very, very nice, and as a tourist you can enjoy it. As I said when we were in the castle, Chepstow didn't exist when the castle was built. Chepstow is here because of the castle. It grew up around the castle. Again, another parallel with Windsor. Windsor didn't exist before the castle, and it became a market town, a Chepstow, and that is where its name came from. But they do it very nicely. But it is here for the tourists, we have to be honest about that. Now, should you wish to stay in Chepstow, there are hotels here. This is one, I'm sure there are others as well. This is right in the town centre though, which is why I mention it. And you can see it's very, very beautiful. It's quite hilly. I'm surprised how hilly it is. I didn't realise that it was quite so hilly. And to show you what I want to show you, I have to need to head to the top of this hill up here anyway. So Chepstow was surrounded by what is known or called the Port Wall. You can see it's been breached here by the road. It was about 1 kilometre long, and it ran from essentially the castle round to the River Wye, and it enclosed the entire town of Chepstow. And it had 2 key purposes, really. Now, the first purpose was obviously defensive. It was constructed almost exactly the same time as the main gates and the 3rd bailey of the castle. around 1267, 1270. It was 5 meters thick, and as I said, it ran round enclosing the town, and it was a defensive wall to keep those they didn't want inside out. But it had a second purpose as well, and that was to allow the collection of tolls and taxes. So anything coming into main Chepstow was controlled and managed and could be taxed accordingly. And actually, the castle and the town were very much maintained by tolls, because there was also a toll to cross the river from Gloucestershire in England through into Chepstow and Wales. So the castle itself was very well funded by the local population and the trade, either coming into the town through the wall, the port wall, or coming across the River Wye and into Wales, or indeed vice versa. And in the Domesday Book, the castle was listed as an asset because of that. It actually generated income rather than cost money. Now, the walls were complete until 1846, when they were firstly and originally breached to put the railway through from Chepstow down to Newport and ultimately Cardiff. Obviously, they've been breached numerous times since then for roads and so on, but they are still largely complete. You can pretty well walk around the circuit, a kilometre or so, from the castle round to the river. We've had a quick look at the castle. We've had a quick look at the Iron Bridge. We've now seen the port walls as well, so it gives you a flavour for Chepstow. I now want to go to our fourth and final place, Tintern Abbey, which for me demonstrates perhaps the religious side of life in Wales, up to and including King Henry VIII. So we'll stop on this video. We've come along the River Wye just a little bit upstream, about 5 miles or so, about 15 minutes drive to the amazing and astonishing Tintern Abbey. And unfortunately, like the castle, it's £8.70 to get in, although there are concessions for students, OAPs and children. So we're going to go in here, past the shop. They all seem to have shops, and we're going to have a look around the abbey. As I said, here in the Welsh foothills, about 5 miles, 15 minutes from Chepstow, you have the astonishing Tintern Abbey. Now, this was established in 1132 when Cistercian monks from France were brought over to establish a Cistercian Abbey here, just down the road from Chepstow, or Siegel as it was at the time, because it was very prestigious, obviously, for a lord of the manor, or a lord of the castle as he was, to have a local abbey that he could rely on. And originally this was just a wooden construction, but as you can see, by the time the dissolution of the monasteries came round, it was something substantially bigger. So the abbey managed all the lands around here, effectively on behalf of the lord, and they separated them into gradings. So I think there were 12 gradings or something like that, and each one was effectively individually managed to the benefit of the abbey. Now, the Cistercian monks were very pious. They were an order that believed in absolute piety and austerity, and you can see here actually the construction of this entrance and the vaulted ceiling is very similar to that of the Chepstow Castle that we've just been looking at, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were built very much around the same time by the same people. Of course, in those days religion was absolute, so it was absolutely critical for the lord of the manor to be supported by the religious authorities of the church and be seen to support the religious authorities of the church in order to effectively he himself have authority over the parishioners and the people under his care. Of course, the main feature of the abbey was the church, and oh my god, this was an amazing church. Look at this. Just stunning. And the demise of the church and the abbey came in 1536 at the hands of Henry VIII and his secretary, Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell had promised Henry VIII that he would make him the richest king in Europe, and in order to do so he dissolved the monasteries. Now, of course, a lot of people think it was a break with the papal church in order to allow him to divorce his wife that caused the dissolution of the monasteries, and to an extent it was an element of that, but the real reason, in my opinion, was money, as is so often the case. The church was incredibly rich and incredibly powerful, and having made Henry this promise that he'd become the richest monarch in Europe, Cromwell had to deliver on his life, and it did cost him his life in the end. In 1540 he was beheaded, but before that he dissolve the monasteries, and he would transfer this enormous wealth that these monasteries held to the king. And the king did indeed become, as a result, the richest monarch in Europe at the expense of the church. And Henry then also obviously became head of the church. But it was not driven by one particular ideal, in particular a break from the papal church and the need for Henry to divorce. It was driven really by money. But look at this place. So 1536, one of the first monasteries to be dissolved, because it was one of the richest. The soldiers came here. They allowed the abbot to go into retirement, which was unusual because a lot of the abbots were killed and made examples of, but this one was allowed to go into retirement. The funds were transferred to Henry, and the land and the buildings here were transferred to the Lord of Chepstow Castle. But he wasn't really interested in it, and he allowed it to fall into ruin. And it's only really since the 19th century when people became fascinated with the scope and scale and majesty of this building that it has been preserved and had a future life as a tourist attraction. And if you are a tourist, if you're visiting Chepstow, if you're in the area, I suggest very, very strongly that you come and visit Tintern Abbey, because it's magnificent. 14th century, there were apparently about 80 monks living here, and these were the kitchens and their storerooms and their living quarters. But then at the end of the 14th century, apparently plague and Black Death came and wiped out about a third of the entire population, including obviously the monks, who weren't immune from this disease. And after that, the abbey struggled for a while because there weren't sufficient people to come here and support it. But by the time Henry VIII had come to the throne in something like, I've forgotten, 1510 or something, the abbey was very much back as a major landmark in the area. This quadrangle here by the church was once the cloister, and these stone paths either side of the grass would have been colonnades, so columns rising up, and then the area I'm walking on now would have been roofed, so in summer or winter the monks could exercise and get fresh air walking around this quadrangle. You can see the path goes all the way around, and the columns would have gone all the way around without necessarily having to go outside Chepstow. We've seen a castle built at the time of the Norman Conquest. We've seen the castle develop through the medieval period into Tudor times. We've then come to Tintern Abbey, where Henry VIII, the great Tudor king, in 1536 dissolved this monastery, leaving it in the state that we see it today. And then moving forward in time, we have the English Civil War, 1649, 1650, when Chepstow Castle again was besieged and became a focal point of English history. And then finally, looking down the River Wye from Chepstow Castle, we've seen the fantastic arches of the Iron Bridge, and a symbol effectively of the Industrial Revolution that made Victorian England. Hope you found my little video of Chepstow and Tintern useful. For tourists or for people interested in history, there's a huge amount here, as you've hopefully seen, and I would recommend that if you have a chance to come down here, do so. It's amazing. If you walk, if you're a hiker, if you like to walk, there are trails and paths between Chepstow and Tintern. You can walk over the hills, it's well signposted, and it's just an amazing area in Wales to visit. So I hope you've enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.